It took far too long, but Whitey Bulger is now paying for his crimes. Today, a federal judge sentenced Bulger to 2 life terms in prison plus an additional 5 years, meaning that convicted mobster will almost certainly die behind bars. WGBH News reporter Adam Reilly was in court and says in addition to losing his freedom, Bulger's pride took a beating today.
Before Judge Denise Casper handed down her sentence today, she offered a scathing denunciation of James Whitey Bulger. The scope, the callousness, the depravity of your crimes are almost unfathomable, she said. Casper also tried to dispel any lingering romance attached to Bulger's criminal career, saying, "It takes no business acumen to take money from folks at the end of a gun. It's not being shrewd. It's not being resourceful." And she scoffed at the idea that Bulger is a Boston icon. "You have, over time and in certain quarters, become a face of the city," Casper said, as Bulger looked directly at her. "That is regrettable. You, sir, do not represent the city." Outside court, the family members of Bulger's victims had high praise for the judge's remarks.
The judge did well. I thought she was real thorough. She did her homework. She did the job right.
But they also called today a limited victory, claiming the assistance Bulger received from corrupt members of law enforcement still hasn't been reckoned with. And from some, there were calls for more prosecutions.
Patney was the other man in the car that killed my father. It was said during this trial. Hopefully the DA is going to bring a case against Patney.
Whether more Bulger-related cases will follow remains to be seen. For her part, U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz cast today as the end of the Bulger saga.
He is ancient history.
If so, Bulger's story may be over before we really know all the details.
Adam Reilly spent the better part of the Bulger trial in the courtroom. He joins us now, along with WGBH Radio's Philip Martin, who is also a regular in the gallery. First, I'd like to hear more about Judge Denise Casper. Did it come as a surprise that she castigated him before or after the sentencing?
A few of us were kibitzing about this in the media gallery or the media section of the courtroom before she made her pre-sentencing remarks. And a lot of us were saying, oh, well, if it were Mark Wolf or someone like that, we know that he would give this sort of passionate oratory from the bench, but she probably won't do that. And all of us who thought that turned out to be wrong. She was really, really powerful, really compelling. I think all the more so because she's not someone who comes across as voluble. You know, she doesn't seem to sort of perform up there. She's very understated. And I think that made it extra powerful when she said some of the things that that we heard just a moment ago. And that wasn't all she had to say. She said, for example, that Bulger's crimes were, to her mind, especially disgusting because the only reason he committed them was for money. And that, again, is part of, I think, this real concrete effort she made to de-romanticize everything that he's done over the years. She told him, you know, you claim that in some way you're a righteous victim, that you received, promises of immunity from the federal government, but you undercut your own claims of righteousness by running away and, hiding out for 16 years. And she said, Bulger has said that he believes this was a sham trial. And she took that on directly. She said, you may call this a sham, but I am fully convinced that you received a full and fair trial and had fantastic representation. Call it whatever you want. You got a fair shake here. So she was very compelling.
Phil, I think one of the lasting impacts of this for me was the victims pointing to the fact that the FBI and other law enforcement people have not been held accountable, and they don't feel it's over. So while Carmen Ortiz may feel like this is the end, and that's she's in law enforcement, it's not for a lot of those people.
Oh, to say the least. I mean, the arc of Bulger's life, of course, this is it. This is the end of the rainbow for him. But this is, for many of these families, this is the beginning. There are all types of investigations into the role that the FBI played in terms of providing informants. Those informants in the form of Bulger, in the form of Fleming, in the form of Monterano. And the danger and the problems that caused for these families, including the deaths of obviously many innocent people. So what's happening right now is you have Stephen Lynch, for example, Representative Stephen Lynch, looking at an informants bill, which would sort of modify, in fact, change the way that informants are used in this country. That's something that was shelved last year during committee, but it's something that Stephen Lynch has been advancing as a bill with support from the families. You also have families connected to, and this is much too long of an explanation to go into, but families connected to organized crime in New York who feel that some of their relatives, I know this sounds like an oxymoron in the context of organized crime, but some of their families they felt were put in jail wrongly as a result of informants, and they have actually met with the families of Bulger's victims here in Boston. This happened over the summer, where they see the role of informants and the role of the FBI as being very problematic, and there's an effort toward reform.
We already know Peter Lemoni and Joe Salvati both were in jail on the testimony of informants.
It's worth mentioning, just to follow up on what Philip said, that if you think back to the trial, that the family members of Bulger's victims said, and I think Tommy Donahue really captured this most eloquently, that they were in a bizarre position in this trial because they felt like it was Bulger's attorneys who were the only ones who were trying to sort of bring the full scope of bad behavior on the part of law enforcement to the fore in this case. And I don't think that's changed, and I would argue that for the family members who feel that more still needs to be done. Roger Wheeler's son, by the way, spoke to this very eloquently yesterday. The son of one of the men killed in this World High Life affair. He ripped the FBI, saying he actually held them more responsible than Bulger for his father's death. He called them cowards. I think people who want to see more investigation into what the federal government did wrong in this case and other cases like it, my hunch is that they're going to be disappointed because I don't think the appetite is there on the part of the feds.
Of course
not. Right. I'm just, but I think it's worth saying that there's a hopefulness there. People feel the story isn't done, but it may turn out to be.
We're waiting for some other investigations that I think we'll be waiting for decades to come.
Yeah, you think of Todashev, perhaps?
That's right. But also, a lot of this is coming from lay people. It's not going to come from the FBI. It's certainly not going to come from government. These are independent investigations that are going on, and there are parallel investigations going on. The recent revelations about informants being used in a drug case in Lowell, Massachusetts, the lawyer for the defendants in this case, Howard Friedman, has basically made a connection between the type of behavior we saw in the Bulger trial and the type of behavior that occurred, admittedly, on the part of police in Lowell, Massachusetts. And so these connections are being made. I think the government would love for this to go away. For them, this is the end of a chapter. Books are being written. At the end of those books, it says the end. But for many of these families, this is just the beginning. They would like to pursue an investigation.
Well, and they have one of their men, John Connolly, of course, convicted of racketeering. He's in jail. So as far as the FBI concerns, it's one bad apple. We got rid of him. He was the rogue agent. Well, that's what they're pointing to.
I totally agree.
Although a lot of people aren't buying that.
Very much the argument that was made by the government's attorneys during the prosecution of Bulger. It was, yes, there were some horrible examples of misbehavior by federal agents, but they were isolated. They were, I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure the phrase bad apple was used. So that's a narrative the government is happy to embrace. The stuff that Philip is talking about, the connections being made, that's great on a sort of a social and cultural level. But if you are someone who is impacted by what Bulger did and want to know how high up the official malfeasance went, it may be cold comfort that connections are being made, for example, to cases in Lowell. What you really want to know is what happened in this story.
Yep.
And I got to say, I don't think it's a story where we will, in the end, know everything that happened and just how bad it was. We just won't.
I think that's absolutely correct. And let me also mention that with any type of murder investigation that we've seen with Whitey Bulger, where there's still a lot of questions that haven't been answered, you're going to find various people who still don't know what happened to their relatives trying to determine if, in fact, Whitey Bulger had any connection to that. Now, I'm looking at a story right now of a woman named Anne Flynn Dickerson. Now, her father disappeared in 1972. There's no indication whether or not Bulger had anything to do with it. But the reason Quincy police, the reason code case officers with the state police and others have looked at this case and are wondering, at least, is because of the M.O., the way her father died.
The sad part of this is that in many ways, I would really like to see Whitey Bulger speak.
Absolutely.
I don't care who gets the interview, 60 Minutes or John Keller or whoever gets it, or me. I'd like to hear him speak to answer some of those questions.
He wrote to her. He wrote to Anne Flynn Dickerson. They corresponded.
He says he didn't kill her.
He said he didn't kill her and says that he believes it may have been a suicide, but also speculated that something may have happened. But he simply said he had nothing to do with it.
Well, just to echo what you said, what I want to hear him talk about is, what did Jeremiah O'Sullivan, the former U.S. attorney, say to you? Stuff like that, the really high-level stuff. And we may get a chance, right?
And John Connolly. I don't know. I hope so.
60 Minutes is apparently gunning for a...
they are gunning, but I also heard they've been shut down. All right. Philip Martin, Adam Reilly, thanks so much.
Thank you.